My name is Ross Terrio, and I'm asking for your vote for Alderman when you go to the polls in Ward 7 at St. Anthony's on Tuesday, November 7th. I'm the only candidate for Alderman in Ward 7 who has strong ties to Manchester, having lived here for 26 years and putting all three of my children through our public schools. I'm the only candidate who has any experience as an elected official, having previously served as your state rep, school board member, and alderman. I'm the only candidate who supports the tax cap, which helps protect you from excessive tax increases. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I work as a hospital pharmacist, and I'm married to my wife, Claudia. We have three children, Jordana, Alexander, and Anthony, who all attended Manchester Public Schools. And we have lived in Ward 7 for over 20 years. As I've already mentioned, I support the tax cap. I think it should only be overridden for emergencies. When I was your alderman before, I always voted against overriding the tax cap. Manchester needs to live within its means just as you and I do. I will consider revenue overrides. Those are revenues not raised from real estate taxes for important things to the people of Ward 7 in our city. I'm also running for alderman because I want to deal with the things that hurt our quality of life, especially the drug epidemic, the homeless problem, and crime. As an example, to deal with drug addiction, I work with a group of people who successfully lobbied Manchester to contract with an organization that greatly expanded access to addiction services for people in need. The two most important jobs of an alderman are constituent services, which is helping residents deal with city government, and creating a budget, which directly affects how much you pay in real estate taxes. My background is well suited to being your next alderman, as being your former alderman means I can do the job on day one without needing on-the-job training. When I was your alderman before, I would routinely make house calls to see residents' problems for myself. While serving as your alderman, state rep, or school board member, I always listened to and represented all of the people of Ward 7. I pride myself on constituent services. I always work hard to answer every phone call and email and answer questions when people need help. I have a proven record of working with other officials to solve problems. I may not always be able to provide the answer that people want to hear, but I always try my best to help the people of Ward 7 and their families. For information, you can call me at 603-820-9064 or find me on Facebook at Ross Terrio for Alderman Ward 7 Manchester, or check out my website at rossterrio.com. Again, my name is Ross Terrio, and I'm asking for your vote when you go to the polls on Tuesday, November 7th. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Patrick Long, aka the other Pat Long, running for Alderman in Ward 7. I'm an attorney and an Iraq War veteran. I chose to get into politics because I see it as the best way that I can help others. I learned the value of service from a young age. My grandma kind of tricked me into it by telling me stories about my grandfather's time in the Marines. As a young boy, I originally found them entertaining because I was excited by the idea of war and adventure. But as I grew up, it became more about the sacrifices that he and really the whole family made on behalf of our freedom. She taught me how lucky we were to live in a free country and about the courage and dedication it took to maintain that freedom. My grandfather left his family at home to fight in 3 wars and ultimately gave his life in service to our country, but not in combat. He was exposed to radiation during the hydrogen bomb testing and died of cancer from that when I was a baby. So I never actually knew him, but I always looked up to him. And one of my biggest disappointments in life was that my grandma didn't live long enough to see me enlist when I was 18. Because of the impact that my grandfather's story made on me, I've dedicated myself to public service. I'm an immigration lawyer and, as I mentioned, an Iraq War veteran. I spent 7 years in the New Hampshire Army National Guard, 6 of those in Manchester. I'm a Democrat, but as someone who grew up in Tennessee, as a military veteran, a small business owner, and a small-time landlord, I understand the values of the other side, and I really appreciate New Hampshire's common sense, bipartisan approach to politics, at least when it happens. Politics should be about making people's lives better, not about scoring points for one side or the other. A good idea is a good idea, no matter who came up with it. I'm running because Manchester is facing significant challenges right now, especially a housing crisis that has driven a lot of people to homelessness and squeezed renters everywhere. I don't know what all the answers are here, and I would like to hear your ideas. But to start, we need to build more housing to help people get the treatment they need for substance abuse and mental health issues, so they'll stay off the streets. I'll work to ensure that everyone who wants to buy or rent a home in Manchester is able to afford it. And addicts who want to quit need to be able to get help immediately when they're ready to quit so that they don't change their minds. In my law practice, I work with a lot of people who have mental health or substance abuse issues, and my experience is that it's important to be humane about meeting their needs while also demanding accountability for harmful behavior. And we also need to support our schools. We need to pay our teachers and other professionals what they're worth. And the first step in that is demanding that the state pay us our fair share of education dollars. And I'd appreciate your vote on November 7th.
Hi, and welcome to the Ward 7 Alderman Forum. I have on my right Ross Terrio, former alderman from Ward 7, who's vying to regain his seat, and on my left, the other Patrick Long. Now, I want to give you 3 minutes, Patrick, to respond to Ross's video, and then you get 3 minutes to respond to Mr. Long, the other Mr. Long. There you go.
So I will start out by acknowledging that Ross is right, that I have not lived in Manchester that long. I've been here 2 years, which I think is a little bit longer than Jay Rouet, though. But I do have ties to the city going back to 2008, because I was in a National Guard unit here from 2008 to 2014, deployed to Kuwait and Iraq during that time, and also have volunteered on various political campaigns going back to 2008 in this area. So I do have longer standing ties to Manchester than Ross has acknowledged. As far as the tax cap, I think that is a legitimate issue that we disagree on. I respect the tax cap and would try to stay within it, but I do want to acknowledge that the will of the people was not that we never go above the tax cap. It was that we try to restrain spending, but that there are legitimate reasons for going above it if we need to do so. And so I would not be intimidated by it. If there's a vote where it's appropriate to go over it to meet the needs of the city, then I would support that.
And Ross, would you like to a couple minutes or?
Yeah, sure. It'll be quick. Ross Terrio, former alderman, asking people for their vote. Pat and I have had some email conversations on. We'll probably get into our disagreements in more detail in the show, but I think that's the major difference. Here's the thing. I appreciate Pat running because I think people should have a choice. Pat obviously is probably, I would say, moderate to left of center. I'm more right, moderate to right of center. But that gives people, if they have a different vision of how the city should be run and how government should be involved in their lives, it gives people a choice. What I don't like to see is when there's only one person running and it's a slam dunk, or maybe the two people who are running are ideologically have the same philosophy. I think that we're both moderates, but I'm probably more right of center. He's more left of center. Definitely, a different vision of government. And just to clarify my position on the tax cap, I support the tax cap. I've never overridden it. That being said, I think it should be reserved for emergencies. For instance, some type of catastrophe, a flood, something like that. I do support revenue overrides for important things. Revenue, obviously, the two-part to the tax cap. You have the part that you raise from real estate taxes, and then there's revenues that can also be overridden, but those don't come from real estate taxes. Those come from, registrations of cars, building permits, and other money that the city would get. So I'm more flexible on the revenue part. It's just, and I know Pat has been going door to door, but I'm very sensitive to the people who maybe are on a fixed income or moderate to low income. New Hampshire's a wealthy state, but Manchester's the poorest municipality, or one of the poorest municipalities in the state. I'm just very sensitive to people on what they can afford. But other than that, Pat and I have had some discussions offline about our disagreements, and I'm happy that he's running because that gives people a choice, and hopefully, I would like to get reelected, but I think Pat's, an intelligent person. He's an attorney, and so hopefully we'll know on Election Day.
Well, guys, you got rid of my first question, which was going to be about property taxes and the tax cap. Do you have anything to add to that, Pat?
Yeah, one thing I would add on taxes is that the reason that you're seeing a big increase in residential real estate assessments right now is because we have a housing crisis. because there's not enough housing in Manchester, it's pushing up the values of your house on paper, but it's kind of a fake gain because you're never going to see that unless you sell it and move somewhere cheaper. Because if you sell your house at the inflated price now, you're going to buy another one at the inflated price. So you're paying higher taxes because of that inflated valuation that you don't actually benefit from. So I think a big part of at least stabilizing taxes is that we need to build more housing, and that'll give us a healthier real estate market and push the valuations to a more appropriate level, and spread out the burden of property taxes on more people.
Well, in my neighborhood in Ward 8, a house next to the $400,000 houses just went for over $750,000.
A one family?
Yes. And it was improved, just before they sold it, they had an addition, but 750,000.
Wow.
So that brings us to, we'll start out with you, Ross.
Sure.
How do you tackle the issue of affordable housing and creating affordable housing, not just for property owners, but for renters?
All right. So I think this is one issue that Pat and I agree on wholeheartedly. We might not, maybe our approach might be different, although I've read his position and there's a lot of overlap. Not to oversimplify the problem, basically we need more housing. We need, a healthy, when I first moved to Manchester back in the 90s, I want to say that the vacancy rate was probably around 10%, which is good because that gives you leverage. You can go to a landlord. They're not going to jack up the rent because they can't, because you'll just go somewhere else, and it gives you options. Now people don't have any options. I've been looking, I routinely look on Zillow at houses and apartments and different things, and I don't think you can really touch a two-bedroom for less than $1,800.
That's correct.
But I'm looking at 2,000, 2,200. So again, not to oversimplify the problem, but we need more housing. We need lots of high-density housing. So how do we do it? Right now, currently, we are trying to incentivize builders to build more things. And so I know Pat has touched upon this, but I was talking to a builder when I was an alderman. He was building like 4 units, and I said to him, I said, why, can't you make this affordable? Can't you make it workforce housing? He said, the math just doesn't work for me. He goes, I'm only building 4 units. He goes, I can spend, X amount of dollars and make a lot of profit, or I can spend, the difference between a luxury house that I can sell a lot for or an affordable is not a big difference, say $30,000 per unit. I forget what he told me. He goes, and yet my profit margin is going to be drastically reduced. He goes, it just for me, for a small builder, he goes, it doesn't make any sense. And so what we need is a lot of small, like 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, high density in old buildings in sections of the city that are already high density. The other thing, and one of our constituents in Ward 7, James Mayo, has touched upon, I know he's been a great prophet for ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, where a lot of, I don't think Manchester's been
in the so-called in-law units.
Yes, where I don't think Manchester's been as hard against it as, say, it may other more rural towns like, say, Bedford, Chester, whatever, but where you can build. So, for instance, I have a Cape. My daughter moved out. I could easily turn her bedroom into a in-law apartment. It's a big addition where she was living. She still, lives with us on weekends. She comes up on weekends, but she's going to college in Boston now. So. But people like me, empty nesters, could turn part of their house, their garage, into a unit. So that's one option. But we really need, in the center of the city, we need developers. And the way we're doing it, sorry I got lost on this one, is we're giving tax incentives right now. So we're saying, so what's happening is when they develop the property, they're saying, don't tax me until I complete the project or until I sell the house. So let's say you take a piece of property, and you fix it, you start fixing it up, you've increased the value. What typically would happen is the city of Manchester would increase your taxes. And what developers, it's called 79E, I believe. And what they're asking for is, don't tax me on my improvement until sometime in the future. A year, 2 years down the road until the project's done, what have you. And that's, a great way to incentivize. The other thing is we have to zone so that you can have extremely high density, because a lot of the people that are homeless or that need this housing are either single or it's just they could live in a two people. But it's not. I don't say that big families don't have a homeless problem, but we could greatly alleviate our housing crunch by high density housing in lower cost. It basically kind of like in a building with just very small units. Okay, I'll go on.
Let's turn it on over to Pat.
Yeah, so I agree with most of what Ross just said. I think we need to build more housing, both affordable and market rate. So we're about 3,000 units short of what we need in the city right now to have a healthy real estate market. So market rate, really, government needs to get out of the way, let people do what they want with their property. So there is a proposal to update the zoning ordinance coming up. It has not been made public yet. I don't know what's in it. But what I would like to see in that update when we get to that point, I agree with Ross on accessory dwelling units. So right now it requires a public hearing to get one approved. I think in a lot of situations they should be by right. And then one issue that multiple voters in Ward 7 have complained to me about is that they own 50 by 100 foot lots, which they thought they could build a single family house on because their entire neighborhood is built on lots that size. But now the minimum square footage is 6,500 square feet. So we should lower the minimum back down to what's in line with existing neighborhoods. And then we should also be looking for more places where it's appropriate to build higher density, where, especially 3 and 4 families, larger buildings where that's appropriate. Finding ways to allow people to build what they need to build. As far as affordable housing, I do support giving tax incentives where they're appropriate. The city also has an affordable housing trust fund, which is supposed to help with that. And they did just authorize spending some of that money. The problem is right now it's all funded with ARPA money, so once that's gone, it's gone. So we need to find a new funding source that's going to be more reliable for that.
Is that money related, federal money from the COVID crisis?
Yes, that's the COVID money. So I don't want to go too far into the rest of the homelessness crisis on this question, but I will say that the city that seems to have done the best job, from what I can tell, is Houston. They've lowered their homeless population by 64% over 12 years. And one of the reasons they're able to do that is because they have more relaxed zoning regulations. And another reason is because they have gotten a lot of money from the federal government to build housing. So we should also be seeking any funding sources that we can to build more affordable housing.
Okay, I'm going to leave up homelessness to one of the last issues. Let's move on to our number 3 issue, the state of Manchester schools. Most of a person's tax bill, a person that owns a home, is the school tax. And the board of the school committees just proposed in excess of $650 million for upgrading schools and building new schools. We'll talk about that first. Who did I start? Pat, do you want to start with that?
Yeah. So I haven't seen the full plan yet, but I know the phase 1 of the plan was the $306 million plan, and I think we need it. The Wilson Street School is falling apart. That needs to be closed, and we need to build replacement schools. And the middle schools are what I think is the biggest thing, and I'm not the expert, so I'll defer to people who are, but what seems like the biggest thing to me is that they're not really prepared to provide a 21st century education. They don't meet the physical requirements to provide the technology you need when everything is computerized and you need more access to electrical outlets and to broadband and those sorts of things. So they need to be renovated at least to accomplish that and bring them in the 21st century.
All right. So my understanding of the plan is they wanted to close 2 or more of the high schools and build like a super high school. One of the problems facing it is where they're going to situate it. I think when you think of large pieces of land in Manchester, I believe the Sununu Center it has a lot of land over in the North End. That being said, I don't.
Is that land that owned by the state?
Yes. So
So the
obviously,
state would have to give that.
exactly would have to
cede
make.
it.
So that's one of the problems. One is where do you put it, because there's just not a lot of land, a big footprint in Manchester to develop anymore.
Right, that's true.
But here's the thing. When I was on the school board, I like the fact that West has their high school on their side of the river. It's difficult crossing the river, I think, during rush hour and things.
Winter.
I think that MST is a great school because it's more of a trade or career focused school. Then you have Central and Memorial. Memorial's a great school. Since COVID, the Manchester schools, COVID has affected all students and pretty much probably universally all school districts in the country, but our test scores, it's been well documented that kids are doing worse now post-COVID. I don't know if it's because they were out of school for so long or what have you, but when we look at math scores and English scores. So my opposition to this plan is, one, I'd like to actually see the schools. Manchester used to have 17,000 kids. I can remember when they had 17,000 kids in our school system. They're now going down towards 12,000. I think we're at like 12,500. So we've actually lost 5,000 kids. Again, that was a lot of sending towns. But since the school district, we have what's that, 20 to a 25% reduction. We have more than enough capacity for all the kids. So what I'd like to see, instead of closing down some of the old neighborhood high schools and building a new super high school, personally, I'd like to see us rehab the schools that we do have. We can actually close some of the schools because we've lost so many kids. But the other thing, it's the million-dollar question, is how do we're now out of all the school districts in New Hampshire, we're down in the bottom three. I think the focus.
And what?
Test scores.
When it comes to test scores, we
Yeah.
rank 140 something out of 155.
Yeah,
But let's just, I'm going to turn over to Pat now, because this is a thing that's pretty interesting about, we were talking about rehabbing schools. Is that possible to take these schools and rehab them? Because I have seen older schools like the Pearl Street School that my mother went to, Grace Metalius, who was, when you watch the video, you'll see Grace Metalius, who was a friend of my mother. She wrote Peyton Plays. That it was turned, bought and then rehabbed and turned into a nice business place. Is it possible to do that, one? And number two, I'm thinking, if we can't rehab them, is there some way? I know those schools belong to the school district. It's one of those technicalities.
Belongs to the city.
I thought it was the school district.
It's
Can they
city.
be turned into some type of a solution to housing also, rather than just selling them to a business or something?
So this is actually a question that came up at the school board presentation on the facilities plan, because I went to that, and that was one of the questions that I was wondering about. But the answer to that was that sort of it depends. So it might be possible to renovate them and put the existing schools back in use. But sometimes it's more expensive to do the renovations on an old building than to tear it down and build a new one. So, if it's possible to renovate them more cheaply and make the changes they need than what it would cost to build a new one, then definitely makes sense to do that. I would support that. But it may not be possible. As far as converting them to other uses, so we have that going on in Ward 7 right now with the Hallsville School. So the proposal that the alderman had accepted was supposed to cost $8 million, and I forget, $8 million and change, to convert it, and that fell through because
Convert it into what?
So they were going to convert part of it into senior housing and part of it into a program where the police work with children who've been abused. So that conversion was going to be more than $8 million. They were not able to get the funding they needed, so now we don't even know what's going to happen with it. So we're going to have to put out a new request for proposals and see what's available. But I guess based on seeing that, I do have questions about whether it's economically feasible to convert these old school buildings.
Ross?
Sure. So, some schools are definitely amenable to being rehabbed. For instance, West High School, if you're probably well aware, when it was downsized down to 700 or 800 kids, they then moved the school district office there. To save rent, so they moved out of the Mills, moved to West High School, completely. They rehabbed it, turned part of the school into a now. And think about the school district, like you said, Pearl Street School, which I used to live on Pearl Street. That was turned into residential. It's a beautiful old building. It's probably built in the late 1800s. I would guess. Probably turn of the century. But it's a beautiful apartment building. I haven't been over there in years, but when I used to live on Pearl Street, I used to drive by it all the time, and that private developer did a great job.
One of my alma maters, and the alma mater of my father and grandmother, Varney School, that was turned into housing for seniors many years ago. And it's a nice building.
The school administration
nice old
building,
Victorian building.
The school administration building was bought by a private developer. Now, where I do see a challenge would be like Central High School, where we're told it's a very old school. It needs a lot of work. And so maybe in that situation, it just wouldn't be, from a
That's
money
really
standpoint,
true. It's
wouldn't
in
be
that bad
feasible.
shape.
It needs a lot of work.
Because you've both been, I don't have any kids.
So personally, I would, but going back to, if we've gone from 17,000 kids to 12,000 kids, I think most of the school buildings can be consolidated and rehabbed. I don't think we really need a new school, that being said. And what was the second part of your question?
Well, we'll go on to a second part of the question. What about the board of the school committee wants its independence from the board of aldermen? You've been on both, so you've been through the budgeting, and tell us what your idea is on the independence of the BOSC. Should the Board of Aldermen still have the right to veto is it vetoing their budget? You both can explain it to me
They
better.
create a budget, but then they have to send it to the city for approval. Personally, I would have liked to have seen, although I didn't support it, I would have liked to have seen the voters of Manchester weigh in on the thing by having to be able to vote on it, was one to give the taxing to be independent taxing authority to the school board. I would have voted against it, but the aldermen killed it. I heard behind the scenes that they didn't want to put it on the ballot this year because it was an election year, and they were afraid that it would drive people who were anti-tax out and vote again. I mean, I would have voted. I don't think it's a good idea, but I always want the people of Manchester to have their say. So I would have loved to have seen it on the ballot. Again, I would have voted against it.
Just a quick question then. And then there was we had a commission, which I ran, the last time I got defeated for running for office, that came up with a charter proposal that would have given the school board all fiscal independence, like the monies that just came to it wouldn't have had to go through the board of aldermen. But the board of aldermen would have still kept the veto ultimately. Would you have supported that? That compromise that was brought up. A commission of 30.
I would have had to say, I'm surprised because I'm pretty tuned in, and I remember the commission, the charter.
Right, there were 9 people.
Thing. Yeah, Jimmy LaHoo was on it. Baines was on it, wasn't he?
Will Infantine, I believe, was on it.
I don't remember the veto thing.
I don't think Mike Lopez was on it.
I would have to think more about that. I wasn't aware of that proposal.
Okay. What? Okay.
So I think the school board should have more autonomy, but there was a lot wrong with this particular proposal. So I'm glad they killed it, and I think there's an opportunity to do it right. I think this proposal actually almost took away the autonomy of the aldermen in setting the city's budget because it went so far in giving the school board authority to set the school budget. So I think what I would want to see in a proposal that I would support is basically we'd have to split the tax cap in two and set a separate school tax cap versus city tax cap. And then the school board could go up to the school tax cap. And I think the aldermen do still have an appropriate oversight role in that if the school board wanted to override the school tax cap, the aldermen should be the ones voting on the override.
Now, my friend, the late Bill Cashin, he's the guy in the big portrait in the aldermanic chambers, always said when we were going through all that stuff, saying that he thought 2 things: that the mayor should not be an active member of the board. That started with Baines because he was an educator, and he also he also was the opinion that the aldermen cannot run the school district. It's just too. If they did, he said they should pay them $100,000 a year because of all the things an alderman has to do. The board of mayor and aldermen, that would be too much. So neither one of you would support making the school board a department. Some people have talked about that.
No, I don't.
That's
think that
independent. It was just ultimately we were talking about the veto power through the tax cap. Okay, there's the problem we've already brought up about achievement in our schools. One thing is like compared to Nashua, this was about 5 or 6 years ago. We had per capita the income of Manchester and Nashua is $10,000 per capita less. But what can the alderman do to help improve achievement in schools? I'm going to let you start with this one.
Sure.
You've been on both boards.
Yeah.
Is there anything aldermen can do?
Like you were just mentioning Bill Cash, so the aldermen really have to step aside when it comes to the school board. You have elected officials. I was, a former school board member. That was my focus. But they are in charge of the budget, so that makes sense. As far as, I'm not really sure on what to do. As far as
Well, can I just,
Sure.
one of the things you've proposed, would it be fair to say, higher teacher salaries? Is that something you support, and would that help improve the school system? You can answer, and then Ross, you can take that up.
Yeah, so I think paying the teachers at least in line with the state average is important to do because we have recruiting and retention problems right now. And I don't think that's the only factor in student achievement, but that is a factor. If we can hire teachers and keep them, then that'll help the situation. We also need to make sure we're paying the other professionals in our schools adequately. And then beyond that, I think we also have teacher recruitment problems because we get the budget done too late. And people have already graduated and signed up for jobs elsewhere by the time we're even able to hire. So we need to work on our recruitment and retention issues. And that's, I think, the one thing the alderman can really contribute to student achievement.
Ross?
So I don't think that teacher pay in and of itself is going to change student achievement one way or the other. I do agree that teachers' pay needs to be competitive. I know Pat had a contention with me. He was concerned or upset that I had voted against the last teacher's contract. The reason why, and teachers' pay really in Manchester is it's really kind of like a tale of two cities, and let me, if you can indulge with me. So when I was on the school board, I was on the negotiations committee. And what we found is that the average teacher, so the average household income in Manchester is around, when I looked at the census, about $67,000 a year. That's household. So that's, that a man and a woman or whoever, a couple is making it. So we're not a rich city. The average teacher, so we have a lot of veteran teachers in Manchester. The average teacher pay last time I looked was in the high 60,000s, which was competitive in the state. It was in about the top 25% of the state. So
for teachers with seniority.
But we have a lot of senior teachers in Manchester. So we have a lot of people who come and stay. So our average pay for our senior teachers is very competitive. It's in the top 20 or so percent of the state. Where our problem is new hires it's still below 40,000. That is in the bottom 20% of the state. So Pat did touch upon it. We set our budget late, so most teachers have already accepted a job, so that hurts them. But the other thing is our starting pay is horrendous. It's below $40,000. So when I was on the school committee, I was on negotiations. There were two problems I had with this contract. One, we were very explicit with the MEA. It was not going to be retroactive. Our attorney, Matt, and I forget his last name now, Matt.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. He had sent them an email, very explicit to the MEA, in writing, this will not be a retroactive agreement. The other part of the thing, the school board said to the negotiations committee, our pay needs to be above $40,000. You have to get starting pay above for retention and recruitment. It's too low. We agreed. So the problem is there were no new teachers on the negotiations committee, so we said to the MEA, look, we're going to make
Excuse me, does only the school board negotiate, or are there any aldermen that negotiate?
No, there's no alderman.
Oh, so it's
At
school
least back
board. Okay.
several years ago. So we said to the MEA, we're gonna do a very large percentage increase at the bottom. We're gonna get everybody above 40,000. The
But
middle.
Ken, I just want to cut across because we only have another 25 minutes. Is there some way the aldermen can intervene to bring it up? Don't they vote ultimately
No,
on the
they
contract?
either vote yes or no. They don't.
It's only a
really-
yes or a no.
Yeah. So
Oh,
so I voted no. So here was so the two problems were, so the MEA said to us is no, you either have to, everybody's gonna get the same dollar amount, but we couldn't afford that, or you have to get the same percentage amount. Now, if the average teacher, veteran teacher's making, say, 67,000 a year, 10% of that is $6,700, but 10% of the starting pay would be $3,600. So we said we can't do that. We have to do a large percentage at the bottom. Everybody will get a raise, and unfortunately, the people at the top will get small raises, like 1.5%. This is pre-COVID, big inflation. They said no, we're not going to do that. So we never came to an agreement. The agreement after I became an alderman, they came to an agreement. One, it was retroactive. They made a mistake. They said, hey, the agreement wasn't retroactive, but we told our membership that, so please save our necks and make it retroactive. That was my one big problem. And two, they kept new teachers under 40,000, which I thought was unacceptable. So everybody's going to get a raise, and I think pay needs to be competitive. Everybody should get a raise.
Well, let's move on to
But anyway, so that was my problem.
another issue, because I know people in the law enforcement, and a close friend of mine is in law enforcement, and they say one of the things, we can talk about police funding separately, because as we know, the other Pat Long and Joyce Craig had the Long Craig budget of 2015, where they boosted, it was a 3.99% raise, and they targeted a lot of money towards the police to get the force up to what it was, authorized at. But I've been told by multiple people, law enforcement, that a person will come to Manchester, do their rookie and first years, and then they'll just be hired by another town, not just the cities, because look, we got Concord at 15 minutes, Nashua 22 minutes. Every place will take because Manchester policeman's going to get a lot of experience, and they're also going to get higher pay. So let's pass this on to you about police funding, which is two really issues. There's police funding. You make it your own now, and then Russ can take it from there.
Yeah. So I think we need to pay the police enough to make sure that we're able to fill all the open positions we have.
Can I just say, Ross, you do, the Board of Aldermen negotiates that contract,
Yes.
right? Okay. Sorry.
So that's the first part of that. I also think we need to be, because we have a nationwide labor shortage, we need to be looking into more technological solutions for our policing problems. So I'm happy that we've adopted the shot spotter, which helps them find out where a gunshot happened so they can respond more quickly to that, and that they've adopted the FUSIS system so they can tap into the cameras of homeowners or businesses who want to share that information so they can see what happened when a crime happens. And I think going forward, we may need to look for more technological solutions because we may just not be able to meet previous staffing levels, or they may not be adequate to solve the problems that we have in the city.
Ross.
We have, I think, two retention problems, a two-part retention problem. So I have a good friend from high school that's a police officer down in Mass, and I did a ride-along. And Pat, I would recommend that you do a ride-along with the Manchester Police. Okay, excellent. So I did a ride-along. So the first problem is Manchester's a city with city problems, and it's a tough job. I was on a ride-along, and a police officer, the man was illegally parked. He was parked on a sidewalk, blocking it. So he started talking to him. He realized he was a habitual offender, didn't have a license. It was a young man, probably. His mother came out and started. Now, the police officer it was a sergeant, the police officer who was going to take him to the jail, was Hispanic and the mother was Hispanic. She started screaming racial slurs and gender slurs at the Hispanic police officer, thinking he was white. But and it was just a hard job. She was just swearing at him, saying, I can't repeat the things, but saying very racist, sexual, gender, bad slurs. And it was ridiculous because he was Hispanic, and she must have. But anyways, it's a hard job.
So it's one thing. That's something I was going to ask. Up until several years ago, and it might be, I haven't checked, of the 250 firefighters contingent, firefighters, the people that actually firefight, there was only, this was according to Joe Kelly Levesser, and I had no reason to bother him about that. They're all white males, and there was like one Hispanic. What is it important? First of all, to increase diversity amongst the police force. I notice that it is becoming more diverse, but the firemen seem to be a bastion, like it's the old days,
My understanding
And we have to take into consideration that this is the first state, New Hampshire, that actually voted legislatively to kill, there's no affirmative action. And so the state is against affirmative action. So
But
I
you
don't
still
know
have
if that
federal law that overrides state, so we still have to
I don't
comply
understand
with.
why there aren't women. There was a woman firefighter who was an alderman once.
Yeah, I remember her. Betsy DeVries.
Right. So I'm sure because Ross's wife is from Brazil, and I'm sure you support diversity. So why don't we move on to the big issue, because we've only got like 15 or so minutes. Homelessness. Why don't you start, Ross?
I'll let Pat start. I just did one.
Oh, okay.
So the first part of solving the homelessness problem, and I don't think we can solve it completely because it's really a bunch of different problems, but we can work on each one, is solving the housing affordability and availability issue. As I mentioned earlier, we're about 3,000 housing units short of what we need citywide in order to have a healthy real estate market. So we need to build both more market rate and more affordable housing. And then the other big component of that is that we need to make sure that people who have a mental health problem or a drug addiction are able to get access to the services that they need for that. And an important part of that is they need to be able to get access to services immediately, because a lot of people have moments where they're willing to get help and times where they're not willing to get help, and you've really got to get them in that moment. So I support what Gatehouse is doing, which is getting people into detox right away that have an opioid addiction. And unfortunately, it only covers opioid addictions at this point because it's all funded with money from the Opioid Abatement Trust Fund. So if you have an alcohol problem or a crack problem, too bad, you're on your own. So we need to expand that to people with other types of addictions, and we need to make sure that there's actually appropriate follow-through, and that people aren't just going into detox and then getting out, getting back on the street, and following through on their addiction. They need to actually be in some kind of services long-term, to make sure that they are continuing on their path toward recovery.
Ross.
Thank you. So I think that drug addiction, alcohol addiction are a big part of the equation. So I had worked with, Bill Barry was there, Senator D'Alessandro, Brian Cole, a bunch of us got together. We kind of brainstormed. We worked with the Gatehouse and got them to, we lobbied the city, well, we weren't paid for it. We just did it out of, as a public service, but, worked with city leaders to get them to contract with Gatehouse to offer expanded addiction services. Now, there's one thing that's unclear, though, because when I talked to Amanda Robichaud at Gatehouse, I said, does it include alcohol addiction? She said, yes, that we could. So that I'm not sure. I was under the impression that it didn't include alcohol addiction or alcoholism. I was led to believe that.
So it originally did, because it came from a different funding source, but then they cut it back to only opioid addiction.
Right, there's different programs,
But
and different, each one has its own regulations, too.
But I talked to her
in
recently,
federal
and she said
code.
it covers alcoholism, so I'm wondering if they're just maybe,
Perhaps in Manchester, they're now just doing opiate they've decided to fund it that way. Because this is
so
a
if-
program that started in Nashua, if I remember.
If somebody
It's like-
has multiple addictions,
multiple addictions.
then they can be covered by this money from the Opioid Abatement Trust Fund.
Okay.
But if they only have an alcohol addiction and no opioid problem, then they can't be covered by it.
Right, as a disabled veteran, many a veteran who uses a substance, drug, again, alcohol, and other.
I'll have to clarify.
We're all
with you.
veterans, by the way.
I specifically asked that question, and they said they were going to cover alcohol. But that being said,
But the you both agree that
Gatehouse?
Gatehouse is a good program.
Yes,
Okay, and effective. That's what Bill Barry has told me. And I know the other Pat Long and Bill Barry worked on this for a very long time.
the other Pat Long was there, too, at the
developed
meetings.
this. They went down to Cambridge with our friend Glenn R.J. Olette. They really, done a lot of study what works because
the
you
other
have to find out what
component
works.
of homelessness, and it's basically other cities, towns, states are dumping homeless people on Manchester. When I was an alderman before, when we did the demographics of our homeless population, upwards of 80% of the people aren't from Manchester. They've come here, for instance, they came here for
the Valley Street jail.
They get out of
brings
jail
people
and they
here,
can't. They have
and
no way
there's
of
no
getting home.
transportation, and nobody's going to.
The other
I've read
thing
it.
with safe stations,
They
people
don't send. Towns will not send
a bus to bring them back. The other
Right.
thing, so
because they don't.
and that's not dumping on
Manchester
our
now.
part, but if we could help people, say, if they're at the Valley Street Jail or wherever they're from, where their support is. Carol Robershow at the Manchester England did a great few
there's a
years
program
back.
they've
There was a
launched.
man who was former drug and alcohol addiction, dying of cancer. He was up in the Lakes region, and they said, we don't have any housing for you, any welfare services. What they did is they put him in a taxi and they sent him to Manchester. That recently happened. Nashua has closed some homeless shelters. They've been sending people up here, so that's a big part of the problem. Again, it has to be with the state, but other cities and towns in New Hampshire shouldn't be allowed to send their homeless people to Manchester. That's just wrong.
But that under the old poor law, that was true. That you were sent back to the town, or they were responsible for you. But the Tea Party General Court of 2011, 2012 killed that law. So
Well,
there is no poor law anymore with those.
Oh,
You're-
well, there is.
Why?
You're required to support.
I don't think that's been
You
litigated.
still have to
much.
support people in your town. under
in
the
your
Hampshire-
town, but if you're from if
Oh, I see
Nashua
what
sends you up here,
That was
you're
recently
not. They're
changed.
not responsible. For
They've
you.
made a small change in that area, and so what
They've
they're saying
there's been
is that that
statutes
town or
changed.
municipality's welfare department, I believe, has to support them for like 1 to 3 months.
Really.
Yeah, so they have to send the payment. From what I understand, they have to send the payment to the town that they've ended up in. It needs to be longer than that because that 1 to 3 months of payments isn't really enough to dissuade people from sending their problems to other towns.
This problem, folks, has been going on. I was researching in 1999 when Joyce Craig's father-in-law, the former chief of police, was the head of the shelter. What's it called? What's the shelter that Charlie Sherman
Fay?
that was the head of? Is that family?
Families in transition?
No, the one that's downtown. The one Charlie Sherman.
Yeah, now it's Families in Transition.
They call it Families in Transition.
Well, it used to be.
Oh, you're having
Something
memory loss.
Horizons.
My memory loss says, yes.
Bright Horizons or something. before
Right.
that.
It was something Horizons.
Horizons.
New
New
Horizons, right. And people are brought here. But they come from all over.
But the
That's
other
been
thing
going
is-
on. But
I wanted to
I'm
add
just going to
something
say,
to that, So-
former Chief Craig was the head of that, and there was a huge crisis in 1999.
But part of the solution should be this. So I work in a hospital as a pharmacist. So when people come to the hospital, and a lot of times they need different services. They need food stamps. They need shelter. They haven't applied for Social Security. What the hospital will do, and again, this helps the hospital because if these people have no resources, the hospital isn't going to be paid. We have social workers. This is what the city should do. I hope they're doing it already. Work with our homeless population. Oh, you're eligible for SSDI? We're going to apply for you. You're eligible for Medicaid or Medicare? We're going to apply for you. You're eligible for all these different benefits from the state and federal government. So instead of for the city completely footing the bill for everything, have a social worker or social workers. You're probably going to need multiple social workers going and finding what they're eligible for, what benefits, housing, Section 8 housing, all of these things. Get those benefits so that the city's not footing the complete bill for food, shelter, in clothing, medical care, and et cetera. That's, if we're not doing that, we need to be doing that yesterday.
Okay,
So
we're gonna. I'll give it over to you, and then you can check. Isn't that what the Beach Street Shelter overhaul and the new Department of Homeless? It was called the Homeless Initiatives when it was under firefighters. I don't know what it is now, but isn't that one of the things they were supposed to do? But Pat, you talk to whatever you like for the next 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah, so that is my understanding of what the engagement center is doing.
Right.
And absolutely, the aldermen need to be following up on that and making sure that's actually happening. Because I visited Boston's engagement center recently, and it's a mess. So I don't think
The
we want it to
Boston
become,
Engagement
yes.
Center is.
It's basically just a giant encampment outside of it. It's become a location for people to hang out and not actually a place to get the services they're supposed to be
Is
getting.
that on Melania Cast Boulevard?
So, technically no, but it's in that
I
area.
heard a lot of horror stories about Melania Cast.
Yeah. So
This is a problem that's just exploding all over the country, and this isn't brand new to Manchester. And
Yeah.
but
So-
I think people are doing as good as they can. But
well.
so that's what the Beach Street homeless shelter was going to become an engagement center. Yeah.
Yeah. So far, the engagement center's open. We are not having that problem in Manchester that they're having in Boston. We need to make sure we keep it that way. I agree with Ross that a long term, a big part of the solution is getting people connected with, other services that'll help them, especially navigating housing benefits for those who are eligible, navigating medical benefits, getting jobs if they're able to work. So connecting people to services is important. And the other thing I add from the reading I've been doing about Houston's best in the nation program with eliminating homelessness is the one thing that they seems to be better than a lot of other places is that they've really focused on coordinating all the different parties that are involved in dealing with homelessness, whereas the city, nonprofits, I think they have county government doing it too, which we don't really have. But
Right, our county government is very effective,
but
in my opinion.
It is?
No, it isn't.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, because the
county
Oh,
government's
sorry.
creating the problem by releasing people from jail and dumping them on us. So maybe they do need to be more involved in solving the problem.
Yes, that's true. But Manchester, the county commission, Manchester, Nashua's on it's the county commission too. But if you can dump the problem on Manchester, because like you said, Nashua closed its homeless shelters and just sends them up here. There was a story a couple weeks ago where an elderly person, they dropped them off
I saw
right
that.
in front of City Hall. But see, that happens in New York City too. When you have a big city, they're dumping. But New York City has special privilege. The state legislature realizes that and, targets some aid. So, Ross, we're running out of time, but
How much time
I
do we
got a
have?
question. We got about 4 minutes.
All right.
So, would you have voted to create this Department of Homelessness? One, and do you believe aldermen have the right of access to the information from the
That's a lot.
Department of Homelessness
so
or Beach Street Shelter?
Pat, we had an email discussion. He took exception. We had a homeless coordinator before, which I supported. Pat took exception to my vote because I voted against making it a department. Basically, it was initially a department of one. I would have kept it as a coordinator. Pat didn't think that I took the issue seriously enough because it wasn't a department. I don't know. I think it was semantics. That being said, so anyway,
Are we talking about the other Pat Long that's sitting right here?
This Pat Long.
Okay, not the other Pat.
We had emailed.
Okay, this Pat
He
Long.
had taken exception to my vote.
That's the thing about
against
having the same name.
we had a homeless coordinator, which I wanted to keep, and the proposal was to make it a department, so it would have the same power as the police department, fire department.
Right.
Although it would only be one person at the time. I voted against it. I said I wanted to keep the coordinator. Pat was upset or took exception to my vote. He said, that's not serious enough if you don't have a department. So that's an area that we disagree in. As far as, I think Attorney Rice is wrong. I would look at Yeah, are you familiar with HIPAA for healthcare and FERPA for students?
Well, HIPAA's a
Yeah,
separate
yeah.
issue.
I think that as long as you're not, no, I'm making an analogy
Right.
though. As long as you're not abusing the information for, to slander, libel, to make personal monetary gain, if
Well,
there are
aldermen
exceptions-
have right to
yes,
confidential information, but they can't leak it.
They
right.
have a right. I think Attorney Rice was wrong. I think the aldermen have the right to this information, confidential information, for government purposes to do their job.
Right.
You can't abuse the
sir.
information. Again, FERPA and HIPAA have exceptions. So where people are using it for legitimate purposes, you can't
Okay.
use it for. And so I think Attorney Rice was incorrect. I think the
We-
aldermen should have access to this information. Again, as long as they're doing it for making a decision, policy making, benefits, and things like that.
Pat, you're going to get like the last word, except for goodbye from both of you.
So, on the Director of Homelessness Initiatives and the department, I do think it's important for that individual to have that level of authority, because going back to looking at what Houston's done, that's made them able to reduce their homeless population by 64%. A big part of that is that they really have coordination between everyone involved. And we need someone who has the authority to actually make that coordination happen, has the gravitas in that position to make that happen, so that people aren't working at cross purposes or duplicating things that are unnecessary, and so that there really is a one coordinated plan. As far as access to information, I think Attorney Rice's position was based on the state constitution, not federal law, and I think it was a correct interpretation. But I also think that the aldermen, regardless of what the law allows, really don't need access to the names of people and the beds they're sleeping in. What the aldermen need access to is statistics, data. It's how many people are at the shelter, how many have been there for, say, 6 months or longer, what have we tried with these people, and why has it not worked. So that sort of aggregate data is a lot more important than the individual information about people.
Okay, Russ, 1 minute. Look at the camera and make your pitch, and then we'll end with you, Pat.
All right. Ross Terrio, former alderman for Ward 7, and asking for your vote. Running again. I have a track record. I've done the job. I know how to do the job. I've gone above and beyond in the past. I support the tax cap, and you have a choice. Pat Long, who I've had good discussions with. I respect his positions. Obviously, their positions are different from mine, and you have a clear choice in this election on, what you think the role of government is.
And that's what we're going to
thank
have
you.
to end with you. Pat, take it out.
Patrick Long, asking for your vote on November 7th. So I have a record of dedication to public service, a Iraq War vet. Additionally, I think, better vision for the office. I think the homelessness problem is the biggest issue facing the city right now. And I would take that issue more seriously than Ross has taken it previously. And I would make sure we're building an appropriate amount of housing and that we are getting people access to the services that they need.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, audience. See you next week.
All right, you gonna have a beer?